Good morning or afternoon, everyone joining us. My name's Sierra Johnson. I'm your Special Projects Coordinator with the VPPPA National Office, and I'll be your moderator today. I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's discussion regarding the updated VPP Policies and Procedures Manual. Today's presentation would not be possible without the hard work from the VPPPA's Legislative and Regulatory Committee, who thoroughly reviewed the manual and compiled questions from our membership to facilitate today's conversation. If you see the committee's chair, Sean Horn, hiding in the chat, please be sure to thank him for his help in putting this together. It wouldn't be possible without him. Just some quick housekeeping items before we get started. If you would like to reference the new manual, there is a link to do so in the description box below today's video. And after the discussion, we'll have some time to address your questions. So please type those into the chat, accessible on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Driving the conversation today, we have the VPPPA's chairperson, Terry Schulte, and OSHA Director of Cooperative and State Programs, Doug Kalinowski, to ensure your questions are answered to the best possible extent. Doug is joined by his team of colleagues. And now I will turn it over to our speakers to introduce their team and get us started today.
Thank you very much, Sierra. So we really appreciate Doug, you, and all your colleagues coming on today to review the VPP manual that was issued out in January. So, and I also want to highlight the fine work that the Legislative and Regulatory Committee did for this. Particularly Sean Horn and Courtney Malvo and their efforts to assemble questions from our membership. And I will say some of our questions came from OSHA as well. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to discuss, our ongoing partnership and our collaboration to ensure that the VPP manual's intent and impetus for this revision is thoroughly reviewed, so we can continue our great partnership and for this program. So Doug, I'll let you introduce your staff and we'll get into the questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry, for allowing us to have this discussion and clarify anything we need to clarify and make things clear. With us today, as you can see on the screen, is Sherman Williamson, who is the Director of the Office of Partnerships and Recognition, who oversees the VPP program, Dayal Mohammed, who is a supervisor in that program, and Jackie Annis, who's, I think her classification officially is industrial hygienist. Jackie was probably the lead person, the subject matter expert on the revisions to this manual. So we have all these people here. If I can't answer a question, they are here to help me out because, I know a lot of the big picture and a lot of the issues as they arise, and I get involved in them. But sometimes there may be some operational issues that somebody may have a question about I can't answer. And so they're here to help. And I'll also add the fact that if we don't get to all the questions, they can either send them directly to me or they can funnel them to you, Terry, and VPPA, and we will get a written response to any follow-up questions we don't get to. So.
Well, I really appreciate that, Doug. So thank you for once again agreeing to do this, and hopefully we can have a discussion and really just get any perceptions or some perceived intent behind some of the things that are in the manual kind of cleared up today. So with that, I think we'll just start off. If you can kind of maybe give us a little background on what prompted the update to the manual and maybe just some of the were there any concerns for the revision? So
for a number of reasons, if you look back, and many of the people listening in, and I know, Terry, that a number of years ago, probably, in the previous administration, we issued a number of policy memos, right, to modify some of the things in the manual. And one of the purposes of revising this was to actually incorporate those policy memos into the manual itself. And actually, I'll suspect that many people on this call, also on this webinar, also have their own internal policies and procedures manuals for various things. And the ideal situation, from my perspective, is to evaluate them and review them every 3 years. That's almost impossible, and I think other people have the same kind of perspective. But next thing you know, it's 5 or 6 years before you actually get to it. So the impetus was really to, hey, let's look at things, and Terry and other people out probably in the audience we've run into situations where the manual wasn't clear, right? Like, how do you deal with NAICS codes? And so we wanted to clarify some of those things and put it in the manual. Many of OSHA's folks out in the field who are also listening in as well today, everyone should be aware of that too. So they're listening in as well, so they hear the same thing. So we wanted to clarify some issues that popped up along the way. And the other thing was just to make it better, right? We change the organization of the manual itself to line it up. And keep in mind, this manual is really the policies and procedures that OSHA follows to implement, VPP. And so there's certain things in here that, your members don't even may not care about necessarily, except for the fact that there may be some underlying things that we've changed policies and procedures to make it more efficient, to make it easier, to make things simpler. And therefore they may see the results, but they may not really tie what's in the manual, how the regions, the national office interact. And there's some things in there about data entry, which it doesn't necessarily apply to your members directly, but it does apply because historically in our VAD system, our data system, all the data came to the national office and staff in the national office entered it. We modified that system now so that people in the regions actually enter the data, right? So, they're closer and things, and the national office serves as a check to make sure the data is accurate, but they actually enter the data. So that saves more time. You don't really need, because many of these regions were maintaining multiple data systems, right? Their own data systems, and that really made no sense. So, we a lot of work went into that to create so that mobily they can enter that data directly into the system. And remember, I'll bring this up right now and encourage everybody. We now have an online VPP application. So if somebody wants to apply, they should try it and use it. We've tested it. I would think most of the major bugs are worked out, but if you test something enough, you always find little bugs that come up. But actually what happens in that system, when people enter the data, it goes right into the VAD system too. So then you don't even have the regions or the national office entering the data. And that's much more efficient, right? And it has some checks in there. So if somebody enters their injury and illness rates, it checks and says, wait, no, you don't qualify. It'll tell that person, you can stop right now because your injury and illness rates are above the national average for your industry. So those kind of things are built into the system. And the long-term plan is to also have sites and participants the availability of actually sending in their annual, and I'm talking too much about this, not getting to the questions, but it gives people the opportunity to, I think people ought to hear this, is to do their, their annual reports, do them online, right? And that would be much more simpler and more efficient, when ultimately the goal, and I think I could say this out loud, is the ultimate goal of revising the manual was to make it simpler for our OSHA and make it more efficient. So theoretically, we can get more VPP sites in with the same amount of resources. Our resources have not changed for many, many years. So that's the ultimate goal too. And just so you all know, and the last thing I'll say before we get to the questions is, a lot of work went into, getting feedback and input on the manual. Terry, you weren't the chair at that time, but initially this was revised before the end of the last administration and was ready to go very near the end. And we decided that, we should probably hold off because there may be other changes the new administration would like to make, and we don't want to get back in the process again of revising it. So we held off, and then Jackie Annis, who served as the point person for the national office, started the work and got input from the states that have VPP programs, input from all of the regions, and it was like creating a standard. Jackie had a charts, 70 pages long, of comments, suggestions, and changes. And before we could actually finalize the thing, and we also got feedback from the national office directorates, before finalizing, Jackie actually either directly or through me addressed all of those issues, right? Either said, no, we can't change it, or no, that's a good idea, we'll make that change. And, and to try to get cooperation from across OSHA. And we did get feedback when Mike Maddox was still the chair, I think. I gave it to him informally and said, don't review it in detail, but review the big picture. If you see some major policy issues, please let me know soon. And I did the same thing with Jay Rodriguez before he took another job and moved on. So there was a lot of input put into this manual, I think. And with the ultimate goal was to make it simpler and easier. And can we get like 15,000 VPP sites on board, right? We might need a few more resources. But anyway, Terry, I'll turn it back to you now.
Yeah, no, I certainly concur with trying to get 15,000 VPP star sites. We certainly support that effort, and and I do know me and Jay did talk with you, spent a few hours in your office, if I recall, going through some of these things. So that's good to highlight that there was some collaboration. One of the things that our committee did notice was the 2009 version was posted in the Federal Register and went through there. So there's just some question on, why OSHA didn't follow that same practice. But it sounds to me like you are still open to comment, and if changes are agreed upon by everybody, to address those and make those changes. Is that accurate to say, Doug?
Yeah, if we have the legal authority to make those changes. And to be accurate, we didn't publish it because we didn't think we had substantive changes in this one from what we were doing. We were trying to line things up and make it clear, not necessarily make dramatic changes by publishing it in the Federal Register. And there was no, and actually the time it takes to get something published, it might have been another 2 or 3 years before we even got the manual out, right? Even if it's just a publish of a notice, it sometimes takes a lot of time to get through all, our own internal Department of Labor reviewers beyond OSHA, as well as to the Office of Management and Budget. So we figured this was simpler to do it this way. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine as long as we can continue our dialogue, and as things come up, we can talk about having an evergreen manual, as I call it, to make those changes where we all can address future items. And we've talked about some areas there may be some need for more clarification. So. If you're open, we're open. So we appreciate that, Doug, for sure. So thank you very much. One of the things that our membership brought up was there was a lot in here about whistleblower and the requirements. So, as VPP, one of the main tenets of VPP is a collaborative working relationship with hourly employees and management and OSHA. So, kind of having that process is really a core element. So we're just wondering, was this more of a administrative driver to put in the whistleblower requirements, or had OSHA kind of encountered any problems like fear of reprisal, was there any 11C actions that you see stemming from these? So really just trying to get an understanding, because for us, this is really a base case operation anyway. We would want to address those outside of the whistleblower program. We feel like our VPP star site should really already have that in place. So if you could speak to that a little bit, I think that would help us all.
So I think it's a combination of things, Terry. Number one, obviously, just like you said, it should be a core element somehow, and making sure that those potential whistleblower issues are addressed before they turn into a whistleblower complaint, right? And
Yes.
Number two, we've been encouraged from our own Directorate of Whistleblower Protection Programs to include more, which makes sense. And one of the perspectives we always try to take, and Whistleblower has, is make sure employers understand what their rights and responsibilities are, under 11C. And I think that's in there because I think what OSHA runs into a lot of times in 11C complaints is the employer goes, well, I didn't know I couldn't do that, right? And so we're just it's more of an educational opportunity to make sure the sites who are the best of the best actually have that considered in their safety and health program. That's probably the key. And as far as I know, the issue of whistleblower around VPP sites is very, very rare, if at all. I don't recall any in recent history where we've had a whistleblower complaint or investigation at a VPP site. That's very, very, very rare. So the intent was just to, build on, a continuous improvement, make sure all the sites have a good understanding of what their rights and responsibilities are. That was the main purpose of adding.
Okay. Well, thanks for that clarification. I think that really helps. So, in just talking, there's been some reference to enforcement activity during on-site evaluations. So, as you know, with STAR sites or sites that are working towards VPP, there's already a collaborative working relationship between management, the workforce, and OSHA to improve safety and health performance. So there was, some language in there, and maybe it was simplified from my interpretation on this process. But I will say some of our membership was their ears perked up a little bit when they were hearing about enforcement, reference to enforcement activity during on-site VPP evaluations. So I was hoping that maybe you could address that a little bit in how you would handle, if you see a safety and health gap identified during an on-site VPP evaluation, what would be your reference, or before you referred it to enforcement, what would be the process that would be intended here?
No, so yeah, I think you said it, Terry. This is a cooperative program, right, between the sites and the on-site evaluators, and I think very similar to the on-site consultation program. If one of the reviewers that are on site sees something that's considered serious, their obligation is to ensure that gets corrected. And I can't tell you what percentage. It's the vast majority of, if they identify a machine guard missing, that's simple, right? Probably the more complicated things are program related, like lockout, tagout. And if they identified something, they work together, and I think the vast majority of times they figure it out. And they're not, the first response is not to turn these folks over to consultate or to enforcement. Now, if an employer, if they think there's a serious hazard or violation, and that site refuses to address it, they're obligated to turn it over. But I don't know how often that happens, if it happens at all, right? Because most time it's they're working together to solve things. And what you see most of the time is the sites, what I see is they go above and beyond, right? Just strict. And I mean, regulations or standards are minimums. So so to clarify that, that's not, obviously, if there's a complaint, or if they're in the middle of a on-site review and there's an incident or a complaint, then enforcement's coming in just like they would if they already they were exempt from, already under a VPP STAR.
So there's no change in direction, and I think STAR sites by and large would recognize that enforcement standards are the minimum standards, and we want to go above and beyond. So I think you're in agreement. I think the question really centers around, has there been any change in direction on this? And it doesn't sound like it has. So appreciate the clarification there, Doug, for sure.
Not at all. And I guess I would encourage people to talk to the region if they ever run into a situation where they feel like it is a change. We have a lot of people doing evaluations. Trying to maintain consistency across the country is always a challenge, but
sure. So I will tell you, one of the things that I do like about this new manual, is that there is more reference to safety and health systems and safety and health programs. So I noticed that really you have adopted the OSHA 2016 recommended practice for safety and health programs. And so that left some of our membership just questioning, because as you're aware, VPP is a safety and health management system. It does do a lot. So if you might give us a little background on kind of, what led to the inclusion of that, and do you see any differences between the two? And more specifically, kind of what are you looking for from the sites? Are you looking for, once again, any change in direction from adding these safety and health management systems?
Well, I think, the one thing I want to be clear is, the basic tenets of the safety and health management system remain. There's all kinds of different programs out there that really the basic tenets remain the same. And OSHA revised the recommended practice for safety and health because the previous guidelines dated back to 1989, right? So we're talking about 30 years ago. And so the goal in changing that was really not to necessarily impact the sites tremendously. They make a lot of changes, but OSHA needs to speak with one voice, right? And if we have recommended practices for safety and health programs, we tried to incorporate those basic things into the manual as well. But, you know, there's lots of ways. And whenever I've been to a VPP site or looked at a VPP site program, their safety and health management system typically goes even beyond the recommended practices, right? And they went beyond the base, you know, if you looked at how they analyzed it all. So my point is that was done to make it more uniform. In our consultation program, they have a form called the Form 33, where they actually it was validated 30 years ago to evaluate somebody's safety and health program. Well, that was based on the 1989 guidelines, right? So they're actually spending a lot of time to change and revalidate that form. So when they go in and evaluate somebody's safety and health program for the small to medium-sized employer, it's consistent with the guidelines as well. So that was the main goal, just to make it consistent. It really should not significantly impact anybody that's already in VPP or anybody trying to get into VPP.
So yeah, that's great. You know, we had some of our members say, or you know, do we have to actually meet the verbatim, you know, recommended practice, or if we're doing the equivalent or better, you know, you'll accept that. So it sounds like you'll as usual, you'll above and beyond is always better, right?
Yes,
So,
yeah, most definitely. And we expect continuous improvement from, you know, that's one of the premises of VPP too. So
sure.
Even if they met exactly what the safety and health recommendations are, you know, over time, my guess is they're going to get better.
Good point. Yeah, that's great. So some of our smaller sites have given us some feedback on, you know, safety and health programs, you know, such as industrial hygiene and even job hazard analysis. I would argue that, you know, job hazard analysis you may need to do all the time simply because of the work, but in some of our smaller sites, you know, they're when you look at the manual and enhancing or upgrading, you know, your safety and health programs, they were asking questions of, okay, if I normally wouldn't have any exposures to hazards, you know, and I don't need an industrial hygienist to come in, would they now be required to do something like that? So if you could speak to that a little bit, I think that would offer some clarification.
Well, I think, well, I don't think, I know, you know, we changed the manual because oftentimes people don't think about the industrial hygiene aspects, right? They think about the safety, what's going to hurt somebody today. And we changed the manual, or I modified the manual simply to make sure people think about it, right? Because part of a job hazard analysis should be looking at the industrial hygiene aspect, right? Correct. So, I mean, someplace chemical plants, it's just, you know, they do it all the time. But in other places, they may not do it so much. We don't want somebody spending time and resources on industrial hygiene if it's not necessary, right? There's other things you could spend money on. Even sites have limited resources. So that was really set there and put in there to highlight the fact that don't forget about industrial hygiene.
Okay. But if you've done your research and you've looked at it, and let's just say I'm exclusively in an office setting, so to speak, and there's only 2 or 3 of us there, then maybe not a whole lot of industrial hygiene needs in that setting, we'll say. So we get your point, though. You should still consider it, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, if I'm thinking of an example of a call center, right? What's the likelihood, you know, you're going to need industrial hygiene in that scenario, unless there's asbestos work or something going on to cover. That's more like an ergonomic related issue than industrial hygiene, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, we get you. Okay, great. Thank you. So one of the things that was noticed by our membership was, you know, some substantial changes in the application process, and a lot of questions centered around that. So we're hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about, you know, clarifying, you know, the process for, you know, like site-based or mobile workforce applications going forward.
So let's see if I can answer the question the way you've asked it, and then you'll probably have a clarifying question to follow up, right?
Sure.
So
Yep.
some of the application processes was to actually streamline, internal things, how we deal with issues. Right? Like I said, there's many things in that manual that don't directly impact the sites or mobile workforce. It's just internally to make sure, because over the years you figure, okay, this doesn't work quite the way we want it to work, and it may have actually informally changed the process of processing applications internally, and didn't change the manual. So we changed the manual to line up with what maybe some of the stuff we've been doing or things we found out, from feedback, and looking at it from internally and externally. So, and the same is probably true with mobile workforce. We try to find ways to streamline the process, but not necessarily on a high level perspective, really change how we're doing mobile workforce evaluations.
Sure. So, and I know, you had a modified application process. I'm not sure if that's still in existence. And I also know that you were looking at, developing a corporate program. It says basically coming soon in the manual,
Right.
if you will. So I don't know if you can kind of speak to those 2 points.
So what was the first one? Because
modified application process.
Yeah, I think we didn't find it as effective as it could be, and I also, based on the feedback we got from the regions,
Okay.
and others, and I think you found some people that thought it was great, but the majority did not think it was as effective and useful. On corporate's easy, because if you look back at when corporate was created, it had a certain intent, right? And I don't think it's met the intentions. One of the purposes of it was I think it was to allow corporations to get in as corporate, and then it's simplified the process of their individual sites getting in. But I think over time, which we found, it's not been useful to either the VPP applicants or the sites or OSHA either. So we are in the process, and actually we have a kind of a draft overall guidance document that we're working on internally. And I'm probably giving you guys too much inside information, but that's all right. It has not been clear. It has not been cleared through Lauren yet, but we are working on an internal corporate. We're looking at how do we make it more useful to the program, more useful to the sites, and more useful to OSHA. And the old program right now, we currently have 5 corporate members, right? And how many new ones want to get in corporate? None, or very few that I know of right now. And so we are changing it to make it more useful and more efficient for both the corporation and OSHA. And you'll see it. So the other thing I want to make it clear, this is a partnership, right? And I've already told you this, Terry, and my own staff, right? Once we have the basic concept cleared through our leadership above me, our plan is to share it with the 5 corporate members, right? Currently, and say, hey, we're looking at changing this, okay, and changing the approach. I don't want to say too dramatically, but significantly, right, to make it more useful and to encourage employers to become corporate members. But so once we have it all approved downstairs, as we call it, we will share it with the 5 sites, and we'll share it with you too, because as you said, everybody on this call may have been involved in VPP for years, but we don't do it every day like the corporate staff, like a lot of people on this call, right? And so we need your input to say, no, that won't work for us. Or how about that sort of works, but if you tweak it this way, and then we'll evaluate those recommendations. I mean, as a team, we work way better. We can come up with a way better solution than just individuals, right? It's always true. And I mean, you got to find the right balance of how many team members, but no, that I'll assure you, you'll see it long before it becomes policy. And hopefully it'll be a better process than it has been over the last, 20 years.
Well, that's outstanding, Doug. Yeah, we really appreciate that, and reinforce. We're here to work with you, with everyone, right? And right. For the betterment of worksite safety, and so yeah, looking forward to seeing the development and seeing a draft copy of the corporate program for sure. So appreciate that. So one of the things our membership brought up was kind of the increased OSHA history for evaluations from 36 months to 60 months. Some felt maybe it could create a new barrier for site participants. Can you talk to the rationale behind the increase?
Yeah, that's pretty simple too, because if you look at an enforcement perspective, and the enforcement folks look back 60 months as well in terms of history. And so that was really just a consistency issue. It really shouldn't impact sites. If they had a complaint inspection somewhere between 36 and 60 months, that's not necessarily significant, right? If they had it in less than 36 months. So it was really more about just being consistent. And I can envision that it really would impact many, if any, sites at all. It's just telling the people doing the evaluations out in the field, look back 5 years instead of 3. That's all. And it's that simple. It should not. I cannot envision how it's going to necessarily impact sites. And if there was something that happened significantly 4 years prior instead of 36 months, but the site has already addressed it, showed everything, and the reevaluation is where you are right now, right?
Right.
What's your safety and health program look like? Are you really, walking the talk? And what are your injury illness rates? And, so that's really the bottom line is when they're looking at a site, they're looking at what exists today. It's just to be consistent to go back 60 months.
So you'll still have some discretion when you look at those and see what the site has done from a follow-up standpoint to see where that goes as well, right?
Most definitely.
That's good to hear. Yeah, I think that helps. I think that helps clear that up a lot for us. So one of the things, and we noticed with the new manual, or membership noticed, that there was kind of an enhanced discretion in reviewing applications, which could result in increased application times or fewer reviewed applications. Case in point, if there's a statement in here that talks about if you're if you can't get to an application because of staffing or whatever regional OSHA needs, that you can return the application within 90 days of receipt. So you can see where some may be concerned that may be used to kind of not accept applications. So that may not be the way you intended it, but if you could speak to that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
No, I think one of the issues, like I said, it's kind of a snapshot when you're on site. And if we don't get to a site for 9 months, and I know there was a time within OSHA where the backlog was tremendous, right? And it's not that way today, I don't believe. So people are still getting the sites. So if you have an application with all the information in, but it ages too far, right? Then somebody has to update and resend that application in anyway. So that's what that was meant to address for the most part. So I think it was not intended to prevent people from applying. I guess the other thing, I think it was probably also encourages, if I can say this out loud, it encourages the VPP managers and others out in the field to get to those sites within 90 days, right? So that there's multiple purposes for doing that. But one is we can't deal with an aged application. It's got to be resolved sooner. But I think it encourages the staff people to get out there and get to it within 90 days.
Well, great. That's good to hear. So certainly if we're hearing about some cases where things are applications are being returned simply because of maybe staffing or workload issues, would you be okay if we address those with you on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, you can. And I also encourage you from the front end, your sites, because a lot of times people will call me and say, well, you know what, we got to work with the region. So I usually encourage you to work through the region first.
Of course.
And if it feels like you can't get to where you want to be, my phone's always available. And
I appreciate that. Thank you, Doug. Yeah, and certainly just to reiterate, because we have a lot of regional folks on the line, I'm sure, or on this call. So certainly our first effort would be to work with the VPP managers in the regions and others. So appreciate that. Thank you very much. So if you don't mind, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and just talk about, mobile workforce. We had quite a bit of feedback from our members and VPP construction sites. What they perceive is some, lack of clarity on program expectations. And there's even a additional requirements section that talks about the VPP manager having their own discretion to permit less formal elements of VPP to be implemented, and it doesn't really kind of define those very well. So some of our construction folks have seen this as it could become a barrier for entry into the STAR program. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was not modified to make it a barrier. It was really modified to give some flexibility between the sites, the mobile workforce app participants, and the VPP manager. And I guess that's another situation where if it turns out that a VPP manager is asking for more than someone thinks is expected, then another conversation has to happen, I think. So I think that was just to encourage it and leave the door, open up the door wider and not try to be too hard and fast. Because, just like everything else, safety and health protections evolve over time, right? You learn new things, right? And new equipment comes out. So the intent was to really give them more flexibility.
Great. And the kind of along those same lines, talking about construction site, there's been a lot of dialogue and I'll say even concern about what some are reading as a 30-day opportunity for applications to be returned. So in the actual language, it talks about if the host employer from a construction company does not allow a OSHA to come on site and evaluate that contractor or that construction company, that they can return the application within 30 days of the opening conference. So, simply put, as it's been put to me, if I have 10 locations I'm working at, in 2 of those locations, the location where I'm working will not allow OSHA on site, the OSHA person could then basically give me back my application within 30 days of that opening conference because I can't go to all 10 sites. Can you kind of hopefully clarify that for us a little bit?
Sure. And that's probably an extreme, kind of an extreme example where, because if we have a mobile workforce, we can't get to every site, right? It's almost, we're not going to take the resources. If a mobile workforce has 20 different sites operating, we don't try to get to every site, okay? So and I can't give you the number. So we don't necessarily get to every site, but we got to get to some representative number.
Sure.
And this was set up so that, and as everybody knows, construction sites are very fluid, right? Things change day to day, let alone over 30 days. If you watch a construction site, you go, wow, where'd that wall come from? Right? All of a sudden it's 3 stories high and it wasn't 2 weeks ago. So we had to put some kind of time limit, right? So, and I think it's, it's a time limit just to get to the construction site, not to all 10 or all 20, some representative number, because oftentimes the contractor in mobile workforce isn't the general contractor, and that's who really controls the site, right? And if you had 10 sites and none of the general contractors are going to let, the evaluation team on any of those sites, that's a problem. For 30 days, you go, okay, well, guess what? Sorry, you got to start again. And that's just the fact. If that, simplified makes it sense. So, yeah.
Sure. But if you can still get to a representative sample, the 8 out of 10, as I alluded to, you don't see that as a problem then.
No.
That's good. Thank you. So one of the things, and kind of going back into the safety and health management system, it talks a lot about leading indicators, and from a VPP perspective and a VPPA perspective, and the VPP cultures that are out in our organizations, all of us look at leading indicators as what drives our performance instead of lagging indicators. But it seems that we also, you kept the lagging indicators as a measure for applications and reevaluations. So just wanted to know, what's your viewpoint? Some have said, we kind of, that it can be a little contradictory to itself. So if you could speak to that, that would help.
No, I think that's a good question, actually. Well, using lagging indicators, which you obviously use since the beginning of VPP, that's one thing we have to use, because that's the one kind of consistent thing we can measure. And if somebody has an effective safety and health program and it's being implemented well, then those lagging indicators should be okay. But clearly, the focus of not just today, for the last 10 years or more, has been leading indicators, because you really want to, look at things before they become, identify things that before they become an incident or somebody gets hurt from it, right? Sure. And the variation on, if we try to establish, say, okay, you can get in if you have these, if you're measuring these 10 leading indicators and here's the numbers like near misses, that's a challenge. We've tried to find universal leading indicators, and I know Jackie has worked. We've worked on this along, and it is a challenge. And we try to do it with the chemical plant industry, I guess I should say the oil refining industry. And when you talk to them, you find that every company uses different, and maybe even within the company uses different leading indicators. Right? They're all good, but they're kind of unique to those sites, and we have not been able to find universal ones either. But we do encourage, obviously, sites to use leading indicators. I mean, that really is, I want to say it's the future, but it's not the future. It's now of safety and health, and you all know that. So that's kind of the purpose of that. And we do encourage people to use leading indicators, and we look at those all the time, try to sort them out. It'd be nice to be able to evaluate which ones are the best, but like I said, Jackie Annis has worked on this, and it's not simple. And we've had people in a room, we had 12 people in the room saying, how do we figure this out? And they were like, okay, we do this and we do that, and there is no way to, but so we don't want to discourage it. We want to encourage it and let it be unique to those sites.
Oh, that's a good clarification. And yeah, I never thought about it in that light, but different leading indicators per sites. And yeah, I don't think anybody has well, there may be some similarities, not a lot, when you look at it from multiple industries, for sure. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. So one of the things that we noticed was did a lot of changing with responsibilities in Chapter 2 of the section. So if you could just maybe talk about new responsibilities for the OSHA and OSHA personnel as it's listed or reorganized, I'll say, in Chapter 2, that would help.
Well, that goes back to a question I answered earlier too, and that was really, how do we be more efficient in processing things internally, right? And holding people accountable. So we reorganized some things so that we could hold people accountable and find the most efficient way to process things. Because the other thing you also find oftentimes is some regions do things very identically in how they process VPP applications and maintain them over the years. Other ones do them a little differently, not all necessarily uniform. So we try to stabilize that a little bit so that would make it more efficient. The reorganization was not we're trying to delineate who does what, right? And that was the goal of those changes.
Okay, thank you. So I think the one area we got the most comments and one that really caused, I'll say many of us, our membership, to kind of pause was in the new manual was this chapter on terminating star sites. Even including a process flow diagram for how you're going to terminate star sites, and using what some have said is subjective language such as loss of good faith as basis for removal. It seems like there's some pretty rigid requirements in there. So it's kind of led us to wonder, what's the intent behind that, right? Is OSHA interested in maintaining the program, or are they using this? And I don't want to go to past administrations, but is this another avenue for trying to quietly eliminate the program. So if you could kind of, I'm going to say, quell people's fears, that would be helpful.
Well, I can guarantee you that that is not the purpose of this, and it's not the perspective of anybody on this call as well either. So the goal was really to find ways to make it smoother, right? And if you recall, I think it was 2013, was the original memo 7, really said if somebody had a fatality, either their site or a contractor, the intent, they automatically got an intent to terminate letter, right? And that really, reevaluating that did not make sense, okay? So we modified that policy so that really it came down to, we expect the regions to work with the site and sort out whether they still meet the criteria to be in VPP. And those changes made in that chapter were intended to push that issue, push it down. Don't have the regions say, well, we're not sure, we're going to throw the decision-making up to the national office. Our goal was to push that decision-making and push those discussions between the site and the region, whether it's the regional administrator, the VPP manager, and area director, push it down to the regions. So say there's a fatality at a site today. And of course, OSHA does a normal, enforcement inspection, but the expectation is after that enforcement inspection is done, the VPP folks go back and talk to the site, meet with them on the phone, whatever it takes, and determine, do you still meet the qualifications or not? And if they don't meet the qualifications, then they get the intent to terminate. The goal was, like I say, to push it down, so to encourage that discussion at the local level, and not necessarily the national level. So that's what we've been doing. And I think if I look back in the last, that we modified Memo 7, a few years ago to say that, and this is clarifying that. And if I just look at the past year, I don't think we've had very, very few intent to terminate letters. So it's very, very, very rare. So the real goal was, let's cut to the chase. I've talked too much, but the real goal was encourage the VPP site to have a conversation, or encourage the region to have a conversation with the VPP site before they make that determination.
Good. Yeah, no, I think that's good. So you're trying to simplify the process, encourage more dialogue before a site actually gets terminated. I think that's welcome language, Doug, for sure.
No, that was exactly the intent.
Well, we appreciate that for sure. So kind of along those lines, we noticed the approach to significant incidents has broadened as listed in the manual. So, we've kind of talked about reference to enforcement already. If maybe you could talk about how OSHA will use the manual for, those significant incidents and how they refer to enforcement when noticed or followed up on. That would certainly help us as well.
Well, it's a bit complicated, right? Depending on the site and the relationship they have. But obviously, if you had a significant incident like an arm amputation, right? OSHA's enforcement is going to be obligated almost to go do an inspection of that site, right? You could have a situation where there was a release of something, right? Nobody was injured, but there's a release. You go,
sure.
And also the other complicating factor is what resources does the region have? Is it worth their time to go and do an enforcement evaluation of, say, a chemical release versus having the VP manager talk to the site and sort it all out, right? And then they can use their resources to go investigate, the arm amputation. So if that makes sense, so it's complicated. How many resources do they have? How significant it is? I mean, there could be a chemical release that your envision could be, well, if that happened again, a number of people could perish. Then you might go, okay, from an enforcement perspective, they got to go out and do an inspection, right? Depending on and a lot of it depends on the relationship they have too, right? If the relationship is open, right, and they pick up the phone, or let's say somebody does have an incident, in lieu of just reporting it and then just waiting to see what happens, the site, whoever the VP contact, could call the VP manager and say, hey, or whoever their contact is, and say, hey, we just had a chemical release, here's what we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. The overall goal of OSHA is to help protect those employees and make sure the employers have the tools to do so, right? So we don't want to spend OSHA has limited enforcement capabilities and always will. There's never going to be enough resources. So we got to decide where we use our enforcement resources so well. So we can minimize them, we'll do that. But sometimes there's an incident at a VP site and there's no way that they have to, they're obligated really to go do an enforcement visit. So does that clarify things, or is there a follow-up question on that one?
Yeah, no, and I think there's a follow-up statement. I'll say it that way, because we understand where you're at, but obviously a lot of our STAR sites across the country, mine included, are used to actually help other employers, small businesses come to mind, for actually helping enforcement from a repeat violation standpoint of actually getting us involved, and we will actually go out and mentor, coach, train, and help those sites. So you actually kind of reduce the need for enforcement in those areas. So by enforcement leveraging the VPP participants, I think is another good way to do that. And so certainly we wouldn't want to see something in the manual that references kind of these broad statements being used or misinterpreted to contradict that or go against the practice or history and even the relationship that we've had with enforcement from STAR sites. So I appreciate your comments. I think that's welcome news for sure. So we thank you. And just final kind of thought here. There was some kind of questions, and there's been a lot of thoughts around what some perceive as contradictions, or you have case in point. Fatalities for application guidelines of 5 years in one place, and then for reapplication 3 years in another place. So I do want to kind of talk a little bit about, as we get these questions, and Jackie answered it very, very nicely yesterday. So thank you, Jackie. We appreciate you answering that. As we get these questions coming up and continue to have the dialogue, just to ask for your commitment, and maybe we have some future webinars if we feel needed. If and just like to get your commitment to do that.
No, yes, definitely.
Okay.
Sarah, we talk all the time. We agree to this, and if you wanted a webinar on something with more details, we'll do that. Right? This is why we have this relationship. And you may have members that say, "Gosh, how is OSHA enforcing the new walking and working surfaces standard?" And you wanted something detailed around that. I can't talk about walking and working surfaces. I'm too far away from it. I've been out in the field in 25 years. But we could find somebody that could do that for you as well, too. And actually, one person on this call, Sherman Williamson, came from enforcement programs. And I'm gonna highlight the fact that if you had a question on lockout tagout, you could ask Sherman almost any question. Is how this stuff works, right? And how's the interpretation? Here's a certain situation. So Sherman's only been with us about a couple of years now. A couple of years. But enforcement programs was not happy we took him because they relied on him heavily. To write directives and things like around walking and working surfaces and lockout tagout. So, so I'll commit to that. We can do this anytime in the future. If there's other questions that people come up, specific questions, they can send them to you, they can send them to me, and we'll get them answered in writing.
Well, Sherman, I feel we're going to have a future webinar, sir. So I appreciate your, I appreciate you, you stepping up, and Doug, we appreciate the ongoing dialogue and our partnership. It's been valued over the years, and VPP's tenants, was as invented by labor some years ago, still a labor program today, really is about the collaboration, right? And so we can all go home at the end of the day the same way we showed up. So I appreciate everyone's time and answers and the candid conversation regarding the manual. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I should also, Jackie is an industrial hygienist too. And been doing PSM. So we have a lot of experts, right?
Okay.
And You know,
Yes.
Day
Okay.
is some level of a coastie too, a Coast Guard person. So if you have boat questions, we can talk to Day.
Oh,
So we have a
well,
lot of qualified people within OSHA
perfect.
that
Yeah.
can
Well, we do
help
have
with
a
this
lot
stuff.
of marine facilities, so yes, love to. Okay. Well, thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. That was pretty much all the questions we had. I don't know, Sierra, if we have some time for some additional questions.
Yes, we do. And we have several additional questions that have come in from the comments, which is very exciting.
Okay.
Our first comes from David, who would like to know, just kind of high-level overview, what are the biggest differences OSHA VPP certified sites should note with this manual revision? I think we covered the bulk of them, but if you have a couple bullet points, I think that would be appreciated.
I think the biggest differences are trying to streamline and try to make things uniform, right? We're always trying to do that. And so we tried to do that in this revision to the manual. So it got reorganized to make it more uniform. And that wasn't necessarily, like I said, directly for the sites. That's what make more uniform our internal operations. Okay, so that's one of the things that's majorly different. And I think the other thing that's significant is our relation to fatalities at sites and pushing those down. I've talked about all these things first, and I'm hoping I've already addressed the major differences. So those are the big things to look at. And I didn't mention the online application, which isn't in the manual necessarily, but I encourage people to do that. And the other thing I'm gonna take this opportunity to bring up before we run out of time, because I'm not sure how we the best do it. If you do not know, and many people don't know, OSHA has been involved with the Office of Management and Budget on customer service, or as we call it now, customer experience. So a number of our people, Day is one of the key players in OSHA, and we've been looking at VPP. Very good. What do sites get timely information? Do they get good information? We have about 11 questions in a survey, and we've been sending these surveys out over the last, 8 or 9 months, anonymously. We're not anonymous, but the response is anonymous. And we've been sending these surveys out to reapprove and new approved sites. And my guess is the emails are going to whoever probably the plant manager. And we've been getting some pretty good feedback. It's been quite positive. There's opportunities to make comments too, but the scoring has been pretty positive. But we haven't quite gotten the turnaround or the response rate that we'd like, right? I'm not sure, Dave, what it is. It's less, a lot of times from some random survey, it's pretty small, but it'd be really helpful. And I'm going to encourage everybody out there, if you just got a reapproval or a new approval, you're going to get an email that says, please fill out the survey. And we don't see the detailed responses. We only see the aggregate data, but we would love to have more people responding to these surveys. We're not going to share it. Well, we will share the data once we have enough nationally across OSHA, what those numbers mean. But we also collect it by region, and we won't share regional. We're not going to show regional data, but that's an opportunity for us within OSHA to look at areas where we can continuously improve as well too. So, David, I didn't necessarily answer your question, but I got the opportunity to feed in to encourage people. And maybe a plant manager gets this and goes, I don't have time for this. Well, somebody else, they could send it to somebody else. So we would really like to have your feedback.
Yeah, and I'll just say, and I know there was there's a bunch of questions, and we're getting limited time here, but I as you already alluded to, Doug, we'll certainly get all of those questions and, send them to you, get the answers and get those published back out. But, I think it's just great that you're doing a customer experience survey. And so certainly, we would encourage people to fill those out, send them in. I'm sure you're not looking for the names; you're just looking for the content. So we appreciate you trying to continuously improve the process under VPP tenant to do that. So I don't know, Sierra, if we have time for another question, but that may be the last one.
I think we can squeeze one more in, and I believe Sherman has the answer for it. Norman would like to know where he can find the online VPP application.
Yeah, so I will answer that. We are trying to track people as they submit applications. We can help them with problems. So if you're interested in submitting your application through the online portal, contact your regional VPP manager and they can tell you where to find the link and assist you.
Great.
Excellent. And we have run out of time, but we will capture the unanswered questions from the chat and send them out to get those properly answered and addressed. So you do not have to worry about not being heard. We want to make sure you get all of your questions and concerns addressed. But in the meantime, I do want to thank all of our speakers for volunteering your time today, and especially our partners at OSHA for hearing out our questions and concerns and addressing them. We really do appreciate you working with us on this opportunity. And to our attendees, I want you to please be on the lookout for the post-webinar survey in your inboxes. We appreciate your feedback, especially as we try some new presentation formats. And if there are any particular topics, Sherman, looking at you, that you would like to see us cover in the future, please let us know. We're always on the lookout for new things that we can offer to our members. And I want to thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.